Hello. Good to see you all. It's one thing to say when we welcome you into the museum that there are many other places you could be other than a museum. And when I say that, I mean that. And when I say that during Art Basel, I really mean it. Wow. Thank you for being here. My name is Franklin Sermons. I'm the director of the museum, and very happy to welcome you here today. There are some absolutely magnificent exhibitions and programs happening in Miami right now, everywhere, at many different institutions. But I could not be more delighted, and I cannot overstate how fortunate we feel to have Leandro Erlich with us today. Leandro. Oh, I just want to say a few words and before we move into the program, but over the years, I've had the chance to encounter Leandro's work and to then meet him and understand a little bit better about the optimism with which he approaches making art that is for everyone, as we always talk about here at PAM, but making art that also allows for you to step out of your everyday, to step out of your sort of memory and to think differently, to look at things differently, to allow for art to perhaps catalyze you into a different space. And that's what each and every one of these pieces does. I guess it was 2008, the pool was in New York at PS1. I was lucky to be a consultant there at the time and to experience that piece. And then in 2016, we brought a group of folks from Miami to visit Leandro in his studio in Buenos Aires. Conversations happen and get sparked and take us in different places. A few years after that, the exhibition that Leandro did with Dan opened at Malba in 2019. And Dan began a conversation with us. And I have to say, as much as interacting with the work of Leandro, which is a way of transporting us into different places, is that Dan's work did something very similar. It's obvious and easy now to go around these fairs and to talk about how international and global the art world was, or is rather. But in the mid-1990s, it was not like that. It wasn't like that at all, especially from the point of view of New York or the point of view of the United States. We didn't participate in the worldly conversation in quite the same way that we do now. But Dan was one of the first curators to do that. In exhibitions like the Istanbul Biennial. And of course, founding the one biennial in this country that is, from its very foundation, seeks to be global in a conversation that is exactly local and international exactly the same time. And this is what we try to do here in Miami. We know that we are at the center of something very, very special. We talk about our institution being an institution of modern and contemporary international art, but we know that means nothing out there in the world if you don't do something with it. We're here in Miami, we embrace that fact. We choose to at least work to be the best at presenting the work of Latin American artists and those of the Caribbean. We also look toward the African diaspora and the US Latino experience. Dan's work has set the path for many of these conversations. And it is just an honor and a delight to have these two incredible minds here today, and can't wait to hear you guys speak. A few thanks I must make. I don't know how many of you have seen the exhibition yet. You may have glimpsed the pool downstairs. You may have seen one of the installation works downstairs. But you're obviously in for a treat. And as you probably can tell, it takes a lot of people to bring an exhibition like this together. So I also had the great pleasure of of interacting with Dan and with Leandro, with our curator, Maritza Lacayo. I'm not sure if she's here, but I want to shout her out, and would not, as a director, would not be able to be in this position without working with a curator like that. So thank you, Maritza. Also, our heads of prep and registration, JRA and Jody Tao, have been instrumental in creating the exhibition along with Leandro and his team. So big shout outs to Jay and Jody. I also have to thank our COO and my partner, Mark Rosenblum, and Jim Schaefer on the operations side, and countless other individuals within the museum. Thank you all. Thank you to Leandro's team, the studio team, phenomenal group of women to work with, and to the collaboration of Artea in bringing this entire installation to fruition. Thank you guys so much for all of your collaboration. Importantly, it takes not only dedication and the physical desire to make everything come together for an exhibition of this scale, but we were very fortunate and grateful for Citibank as the presenting sponsor of the exhibition, and also for the support of Pilar Crespi-Robert and Stephen Robert, dear trustee, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Oscar and Carol Cycli. Also the Funding Arts Network and Artists Miami. Your support is so gratefully acknowledged. Thank you. And today, for this program, I must thank Marie Vickles, our head of education, who you'll hear from in a second, and Anita Bram, our head of adult programs, for coordinating this entire event. And the whole education team, thank you guys. You know that it's one thing to collect great works of art, but if you don't put people around them to talk about it and to make presentations like today, it means a little less. Thank you so much for all that you do. And I have to say a special thank you to Deborah and Dennis Scholl for creating this lecture series. Thank you guys. And to Goldman Sachs for their support on the series moving forward. Thank you very, very much. None of it happens without you all. I also want to thank our tech team, Denise Faxis and Andrew Bird, because you guys do it all, and Laz Yanis for making us look good. Thank you. Lastly, I think there are some members of our Board of Trustees here. You know, some of you said, how much is it going to cost? And I said, no, don't worry about it. It'll be okay. And you said, okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you. And with that, thank you all for being here. Marie?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's wonderful to be with you both in person and for those of you that are joining on YouTube. Thank you. So, as Franklin mentioned, my name is Marie Vickles. I'm the Director of Education, and I am delighted to introduce our first public program for Miami Art Week and the first in our 2022-23 Scholl Lecture Series, featuring artist Leandro Erlich and in conversation with curator Dan Cameron. For today's program, the conversation between Leandro and Dan will focus on the development of Leandro's artistic practice and how it led to this first monographic survey exhibition of his work, which we are so excited to present here at the museum. So let's get this program started with introductions of our featured speakers and what I'm sure is going to be a very inspiring conversation. Leandro Erlich, born in Argentina, lives and works in Buenos Aires and Montevideo. He began his professional career at 18 with a solo exhibition at the Centro Cultural Recoleta in Buenos Aires, and after receiving several fellowships, went on to study at the CORE program, an artist residency in Houston, Texas. There, he developed his signature installations, swimming pool and living room. In 2000, he participated in the Whitney Biennale with the work Rain, and in 2001, he became Argentina's representative at the 49th Venice Biennale with Swimming Pool, a landmark piece that is part of the permanent collection of the 21st Century Museum of Art of Kanazawa in Japan and the Voortlen Museum in the Netherlands. Leandro has created a highly distinctive body of sculptures and site-specific installations in which the architectural appearance of the everyday functions as a perceptual trap, leading an unsuspecting viewer into a visual paradox that systematically defies certain laws and attributes of the material world. Leandro suggests that despite our collective pride at being able to instinctually locate ourselves within the physical world, the truth is that most of us are engaged in an extended game of probability and chance, in which our situations that can only be real within our dreams cast a spell of enchantment over our waking lives. The accumulated impact of experiencing multiple works of Leandro's within a single exhibition tends to leave viewers with an intensified awareness of this inherent duality of everyday life. Over the past 2 decades, Leandro's work has been shown internationally and featured in the permanent collections of major museums and private collectors. Dan Cameron is a curator of contemporary art who also writes about art, teaches and gives lectures about art, makes art, serves on art-related juries and boards, and advises both public and private collections. He has lived in downtown Manhattan since 1979, although for periods of time he has also been based in New Orleans and Long Beach, California. Throughout his 40-year-plus career organizing exhibitions, Dan has steadfastly championed both the unexpected and under-recognized. In 1982, he was the first American curator to organize a museum exhibition on LGBTQ+ art. And in 2008, he launched the Prospect New Orleans Triennial in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Dan's core connection with art stems from its capacity to expand our collective awareness of ourselves, the world around us, and the way that humans invent ways to communicate essential values to one another. Not only is art capable of changing the world, he believes, but it's actually doing just that on a daily basis. Whether in the cause of furthering social justice or challenging art history, or both. Dan believes that the artist's fundamental obligation to civilization is to push sensorial and perceptual engagement into new and fruitful realms of engagement. And speaking of engagement, we will have a short moment for questions at the end of today's conversation. So I hope you're up for taking some questions. So if you're on YouTube watching, please post your questions in the comments section, and we'll try to answer those as well. All right, so without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Leandro Erlich and Dan Cameron. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure, and more than anything, it's an honor. Just to reiterate what Franklin says, the fact that so many are with us today makes me feel like something special is going to happen. And in my experience with this man right here, something special always happens with Leandro Erlich. Also, apropos what Franklin was saying, thank you so much. This has been an amazing last few years developing this project for PAM. The first version of it happened in Malba in Buenos Aires. We opened in August 2019. But I was thinking earlier that, I've been carrying around this idea of a Leandro Erlich retrospective for quite a few years before that happened. But it really took the team here at PAM to make it a reality. I can't think of another museum or museum director, if I may, who would have jumped on a plane to Buenos Aires a few weeks after we opened it, Malba, just because it might work for Pam. And that might work turned into probability. Of course, right after the exhibition closed, we moved into the COVID period, so there was clouds of uncertainty hanging over it, and here we are with the incredible, incredible support of the PAM staff, the incredible support of Leandro's team in Buenos Aires, and if you ever get a chance to replicate the trip that Franklin was talking about, visiting Leandro in his atelier in Buenos Aires is really, it's like being at Willy Wonka's factory or something. But I want to go back a little bit further. I feel like my relationship with Leandro is one of almost constant good luck and good timing. The first time I went to your studio, it was a temporary studio. It was in the Fundación Antorchas in Buenos Aires. And if I'm not mistaken, you had been invited as part of a group of much younger artists, really young artists, by Luis Benedit, who's a great Argentine artist. I don't know if we have any Benedit fans in the house. And also Pablo Suarez, another great Argentine artist, neither of whom are with us today. So I was just asked to go from studio to studio. There must have been 18 of you. And the one I most remember was my visit to your studio, and it wasn't even a studio. You didn't even have anything made. So maybe just to kick off, welcome, Leandro. I'm glad you're here. Could you tell me from your side what led up to that moment where I walked into your studio in 1993, I think?
Yeah, yes, 1993 or 4, yeah, something like this.
Something like this.
Yes. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Just one thing, because there are so many people to thank for this wonderful project. I was just listening to the introduction that Franklin gave, and one thing I can say, and I think that applies to the spirit of the museum as much as the spirit we share with Dan. Franklin has spoke from his heart, and everything he said, it was not like any introduction speech. I mean, he's very busy running around with all the craziness of Basel. But anyway, thank you. The 1994, so let's press the button going back to the future. Yes, I met Dan back then. I was 21 years old. I was the youngest artist in that program, and we were 8. And I think yes. And when we met, I was working. Let's say entre guillemets. I was working on a project, and this project was a completely utopian project. In Buenos Aires, for those who have never been, there's an obelisk. And the obelisk in Buenos Aires is the city monument. It's like the Statue of Liberty or the Eiffel Tower without being that great. You know? So the interesting thing is like that monument is 70 meters, which I don't know, in feet is a lot as well.
Feet, more or less.
And so I came up with the idea that the city would need another obelisk. And I took that project very seriously. I thought that would be quite interesting to build a second obelisk, but not in the center of the city, not as a landmark, as it's today and was back then, rather to build it on the peripheric neighborhood of La Boca. And I felt like that was an interesting, I mean, it was just an idea, but I took it really seriously. I really, and plus, the complicity of this program, that they fuel me with a dream that they say, if you get the permission to do that, we will help you to get the funds. So I was like, Okay, I'm going to get that permission. And so I worked very, very seriously. And this is when I met Dan. I met Dan with this idea of building a second obelisk in the city of Buenos Aires, which for you to imagine or to picture or visualize, imagine in the city of New York, you have another Statue of Liberty. So,
In the Bronx.
yeah, in the Bronx. So people, locals, but also foreigners, tourists, will come and take a taxi and say, please take me to the Statue of Liberty. Which one? So there was, of course, a lot of humor behind this, but also there was a commentary about the urban landscape and the social landscape and how we read our urban system. So in a way, that project was very disruptive, and there was a moment that I really, this leak on the news, because it was a very attractive kind of thing to publish, and so there was a small newspaper that published that there was this project about building a new obelisk in the city of Buenos Aires. So the news, it was just crazy, and television, and so it created a big polemic, and that's where we met.
And in the meanwhile, if I can just remind people, nothing had happened. You hadn't actually done anything. You were sitting in your studio at Antorchas with a map, right? I mean, what I seem to remember is the map of the city, and you're like, it could be here, or it might be over here. And, you know, all the other artists had stuff in their studios.
Yeah,
you had an idea.
You
had an idea.
I was the most unproductive project of that program. Well, Leandro, what are you doing for a year? Don't you want to, I remember, it's like that question, don't you want to develop something else in the meantime so you can, and that was kind of the same question that my parents did earlier on. Like, don't you want to study something just in case? I mean, don't you want to study something in a parallel?
In case the art thing doesn't work out?
No, I have to focus on this obelisk project. This is going.
But you studied architecture or fine arts, or both, or neither?
I think neither.
You think?
Yeah. I went to fine arts. I quit fine arts. And
Finance?
No, fine arts.
Oh, fine arts.
Fine arts and finance now is very much related, indeed. But actually, I think that most people in finance study fine arts and vice versa.
And vice versa.
But no, back then I went to fine arts, and the school in Buenos Aires was like, the discussion was about abstract and figurative. And well, I mean, it was like, what is this? So I quit before ending the first year, and I jumped into, I went to the university, I started philosophy. And because I felt like I didn't want to do anything related, like I didn't want to jump into any creative career that would drag me into something that would be more functional. I felt like the practice of art and the importance and the relevance of art somehow is this sense of being unfunctional in a society where everything we do as also individual, it has to have a purpose. And when we're talking about the purpose of art, then we getting into a discussion which is larger and deep, and we can go into branches of a humongous tree. But anyway, so yes, I haven't at that program back to. But what was interesting about this obelisco, to finish that story, is that, and to share this with you, because that was I would say the most relevant. Let's say the threshold project that crystallized a lot of things that I have been developing later on is that this project, and there was no social media, and there was not an attempt it was not about making a scandal.
We had fax machines. I think that was
Fax,
the extent of
yes.
technology at that time.
That's a fact,
Thank you.
and that's a fax.
And yes.
Both. But the thing is this, many people thought for a moment that this was part of a potential reality. And it was constructed socially that this was a truth, even though this was far from being materialized. And that made me realize that the art sometimes is almost like immaterial. And so my process in the terms of education process, is not about going to and someone, getting the information about what conceptual art is, rather to do an experience myself where led me to this comprehension deeply.
And you weren't thinking of what you were doing like Christo. You weren't going to make drawings of another obelisk made from a material. It wasn't about documenting the process or making objects along the way. It was a very pure idea. You wanted to make the second obelisk, and there was no intermediary stage that was going to work. Or do I have that right?
Yeah, it's exactly like that. I just did a model, or whatever I did, plans, in order to proceed in the process, but not in order to create derivatives of artistic derivatives of the project itself. I even have to get in order to make that project serious, I have to get an estimation of cost. And in order to get an estimation of cost, you have to get
an engineer.
Engineering. And I didn't have the money to pay for the engineering
the studies.
Yeah. So I went to the university and I introduced the project to a professor of, let's say, the last year of
architecture studies.
Of engineering.
Of engineering.
Studies. And he said, well, this is an interesting project. What I can offer to you is I can propose this project to my students, a graduate in the graduate status is the last final test. So as a technical thing to develop. So in few months, I got like a dossier with like 500 pages with all the
stress tests and everything. Just everything you needed.
Yes.
And the budget.
And the budget, and then I went to see the city government, and when you're that young and you don't realize that you are that young, it's like I see back then, it's like I was meeting, I don't know, people very serious from the city government. I was pretty much like almost a teenager speaking very seriously about this obelisk. And anyway, it never happened, but I think that obelisk is the reason why Dan and we are sitting here today.
And it's not the end of the story about the obelisk, but we'll have to circle around. So I lost track of you for a couple of years there. And then the Havana Biennale, I think, might have been.
Yes.
What year were you participating?
That was 2000.
Okay, so actually, 1997, I remember, was a very pivotal year for you because so many of the works in the show, so many of the works that we now know you for, were produced during that year. So could you give people a sense of what happened between 1994, when you had a purely imaginary idea, and 1997, when suddenly these ideas were becoming a reality? I mean, some of the most popular pieces in the exhibition right now are 25 years old or close to it.
Yes, those were, I never been asked this question.
Uh-huh.
It's a very good one. No, it's a very good one because, you know, when you're, imagine you're swimming in the ocean. So you have no clear sense of how, so at that time, I think that there are moments in which, even though we have a strong drive and exploration, I continued studying in the university with the philosophy thing, but without having any clue of how things will unfold, and neither I have any clear perspective. And I continue developing some works, such as the elevator, that a version of it is in the show here in 95, 96. And the program in Argentina that I was part of when I met Dan in 94 developed an exchange program with a similar artistic residency program for artists in Houston.
The core program.
The core program. And so one artist from the core program happened to go to Argentina, and one artist from the Barracas, Taller de Barracas, or Antorchas, which is this program, went to Houston. And this happened over 3 years. I wasn't the artist chosen when I was part of the program. So another artist went. The second year, another artist went. And it happened that in 1997, the foundation in Argentina was asking all the artists in the program, which were 8 artists or 10, who would like to go to Houston. And they couldn't find anyone available to go. So they start calling the people who were part of it. So that's how I ended in Houston. They said, Leandro, do you want to take part on the core program? And I said, sure, I'm ready. I have already luggage. I was already, I was on my way to the airport. And the core program was a huge opportunity, because it was not until then in the States and during that program that I was able to create my first installations. And I didn't understood what I was doing as the way I understand it today, but basically I was aiming to erase the outline of the art, of the object, of the artwork. I was trying to imagine a type of art that would not be able to be seen as something that you can recognize, and that's why I'm saying the outline, and rather to be inside of it, and without being completely able to understand where the artwork starts and where it ends. And I guess nowadays that has a name. Now it's very much called like immersive art. But back then, it wasn't about that concept. Neither there was social media, neither was this something that nowadays I feel like is very much part of a practice. And that's having the support of the core program, I was able to build the first swimming pool, and back in 1999, and before that, the living room, which was an installation related to works that are in the exhibition, like the hair salon and so on.
And all of those works, it seems to me, have this, I mean, you were talking about trying to make an object or a thing that's not an object that becomes part of its environment almost seamlessly. I'm going to put the words in your mouth. What strikes me is how strongly the domestic theme manifests itself in these early pieces. The idea of the neighbors in the apartment block that you're watching through a keyhole, the idea of the pool that's shared by people, in a complex, the view, sort of like the rear window view where you peek through your blinds and you're watching what the neighbors do. All of those are about a kind of domestic life. And I feel that you seized on that at that moment as sort of your particular terrain. Like your work began to blend into everyday life in a very special way where they really don't look like artworks. Almost none of your artwork looks like art. And that's not an accident, that's intentional.
Yeah, absolutely intentional.
But did you think about the domestic side? I guess that's the question I was leading up to.
I was thinking in domestic style because I feel like I was trying to reach the core of everything we build. Our understanding of what reality is, what a city is, what even art, whatever human practice is very much linked to the domestic, because we are experiencing the domestic every day. But I was curious to see that the domestic is not a subject that we question or we think over as something constructed, built. Rather, we pay attention to the extraordinary events and the extraordinary inventions. Objects, inventions, actions, and actually all those elements that are taking attention from us are clearly relevant. But once we focus on the domestic, I felt and I still feel that it's interesting, because by looking at the ordinary, we can crystallize how much everything is part of a setup built with the purpose of either function or by any kind of goal. But we forgot that, or we tend to forget that all this is part of a construction. So I guess this is the terrain that I was, and I'm still interested in exploring. I feel like we became, and we are as a species in the world, a very powerful animal that was able and is able to build a world on top of the world. And sometimes we clash with issues when nature does not agree on things that we are doing. But the manifestation of our reality is so strong and is so solid. And that's why when we think about what is real, and someone tells you a story, well, that's not real, but this is real. The other thing, but this is a real table. And what is a real table? Someone came up with an idea of building an object that will have this utility and to place things on top of. So I like that idea. I'm someone who like to question.
But the questioning begins with a facade or a simulacrum of ordinariness, this everyday, quotidian feeling that you're just getting up, you're facing the world, and the world looks the same as it did yesterday, but with a difference. And that's where I find that your relationship to ordinary human behavior, our expectations of ourselves, becomes almost the opposite of what traditional art does, because, as you said, traditional art calls attention to itself. It calls attention to its specialness. It's the fact that it's different from the ordinary. Whereas yours, in your work, the ordinary is a sort of a lure. It's like putting a worm on the end of a fish hook and sort of pulling the viewer in by saying, come closer, come closer. You know what this is, you recognize this is familiar. And this seems to be a very important part of how your work functions psychologically on the viewer, by creating almost a dreamlike facade of ordinariness, which is then sort of punctured by a discovery. The viewer always makes a discovery in your work. Can you talk about that dynamic a little bit? How it works for you in terms of the conceiving of the work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you said it quite well. There is this intention of leading the viewer or into an experience, but the experience requires 2 or 3 things. One is the recognition of either the space or the object to be understood as something that looks like
An elevator.
an elevator, a swimming pool.
A swimming pool.
Or, it requires, so basically, it requires the background and the memory of each of one of you to interact. And that level of subjectivity, meaning what an elevator means to you, it would be potentially different to somebody else, but at the same time, it still will remain something that you recognize as an elevator, when actually there's nothing. This object doesn't take you any up or any down. So neither may have anything from an elevator. And the only reason why you see it this way is because, yeah, we place with familiarity, the familiar. But Franklin said something in the introduction that I didn't expect, I never heard, but I think is something in part of my spirit, is that he mentioned something about the optimism.
I noticed that. That's a great quality to ascribe to your work.
And I always felt this way, even though the work proposed to be critical and proposed to create a state of awareness and a deep question.
Like hyper-awareness.
A hyper-awareness, which is, in a way, implies to be critical. But to be critical, it does not imply to lead these to depressing ideas, rather to imagine that by visualizing potential ways of seeing the ordinary, it gives us a glimpse of how about things. I mean, things are the way they are, but things clearly could be different. And if you have a sense of empowerment by understanding that what we see is part of something that we have built, and we are building every day, either individually or socially, culturally, then it means that we are not a subject of a fate. Everything is, if there are issues that we consider we want to improve, whether these are related to environment, social issues, integration, or personal issues. These are also, in a way, on our hands to understand things are not a solid reality. Things clearly, yeah.
It's all constructed, and we all
Yeah.
invest into the construction to
Yeah.
believe it. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what I think of as the psychotherapeutic aspect of your work, or at times almost psychoanalytic. You've even done the analyst's couch in one of your projects. Three of the major interactive installations here, the classroom, the salon, and the maze, all put you in a situation in which you can role play, in which you step into a theatrical tableau in which you're transported either to another time or to another place where you can step outside of your actual reality and become another person, go into the past, create a new personality just for the moment. How is it that you sort of stumbled on or arrived at this idea of giving people the power and the freedom to do this theatrical role-playing inside your work? Because it's really one of the most distinctive features of your art.
I think that there are a few things. It's a good question. I think there are a few things to add.
To add.
To incorporate in the talk. I mean, first of all, I grew up in a family of architects. My father was an architect. My aunt, my brother is an architect. So for me, architecture was from early on something familiar, but I wasn't interested. I never been interested in actually the construction or spaces following the functional role of architecture. Rather, I was interested in the psychological aspect of the space and the way we, the way we feel and the way we act in the game or the playing role situation. Like basically now we are here, the ones we are talking, we are in the auditorium, and you are sitting in a row of seats over there. This is the audience. So, and this type of, so already many things that are part of our social interaction are related to architecture, and there is an anticipation of a role to be played. If we intend to take a shower in the museum's garden, probably we end at the police station.
It's entirely possible.
But if you do it at home and not in the dining room, but in the bathroom, then it's fine. But if you do it in the dining room, then you go to the madhouse. So every space leads us to a function and a role. And therefore, we are all playing a role every day, whether we think we are playing a role or not. And that's one element. Another element, besides the family of architects, is that I grew up watching films. Like, it's a funny story because you remember the VHS?
Sure.
Well, my sons asked me, what is VHS? It's a kind of immunity problem. And VHS, so there was the video clubs. And in Buenos Aires, and of course my first job was to deliver. I came up with the idea that we were always late returning the movies, so I came up with the idea that I was able to propose to the video club that I will return the movies. or bring the movies to the home with my bicycle. I got an accident and I stopped my job didn't last much. But I grew up watching films, and when the DVD came, and we are talking before cable television, at least in Buenos Aires, when the DVD arrived, all video clubs start to sell the VHS for pennies, because they were part of a technology obsolete. So my father, who also liked very much the films, he purchased over 1,000 movies.
For nothing.
For nothing. That was the deal of his life. And I was the one who watched those 1,001 films every day coming back from school. And they were very good films. And so I think that there was for me, cinema has played a significant influence as well, even though my participation on video is not, it does not propose a particular narrative besides the view, which is on purpose, almost like my own homage to film. In particular, Hitchcock, Rear Window. But this is to say that the role I'm sorry I make my answer so long, but you know, once you later on at home at night you remember this conversation, it will help you to go back to sleep. But this is why I'm so interested in the role and bringing the viewer, the spectator, as an actor, and within the space, which is could be considered as a stage.
Now, critics, including myself, have also brought up the literary dimension of your work. I mean, it's easy to point to Borges and ideas like the library or the Garden of the Forking Paths as providing a model for this notion of possible worlds, worlds that may or may not exist, but if we can imagine them, then they do exist on some level. And it seems like this idea of hidden, secret, possible worlds, alternative realities to ours, it's everywhere in your work. You see it constantly. So I wonder if you've been inspired by that kind of an idea.
Yeah, very much. Borges, Bioy Casares, there were many from the writers in Argentina that were, or not from Argentina, Italo Calvino. I mean, there were many writers that inspired me. Never inspired me in the sense that reading something and thinking on a work, but it creates the universe and things that we are interested. And it's interesting that you point out Borges, for example, because and the way and this exploration about the possible realities, because I don't feel very much close to things like surrealism. Sometimes people think that when we are questioning or treating subjects that are linked to the reality or the real and are not real, immediately we label or we frame this under surreal. But actually there's a huge spectrum of questioning or bringing, or opening cracks on reality that are not about the unconsciousness or the nonsense or the non-rational sense, rather the opposite. I think this is very much a very Cartesiano, ¿cómo se dice? Cartesian. It's very logical. Everything here, whether it makes sense or not, is very logical. And so yeah, Borges is and remains a great inspiration.
Now, you say you're not a surrealist, and yet I think one of the things that people might agree is when you've gone through an exhibition of Leandro Erlich's installation and you come out at the other side, the world doesn't seem exactly the same way as it seemed when you first entered into the exhibition. It's like by twisting and creating all of these surprises in your perceptual expectations of the world, you step back out into the cold light of reality, and it all looks a little bit off. It all looks a little bit strange. And for me, that was the inspiration behind making an exhibition of your work in the first place, because I felt like the cumulative impact of seeing work after work after work of yours would actually find people incredibly, I hesitate to use the word, but liberated from their sense of sensory grounding on the earth, and that could be a good thing.
Yeah, maybe once you go out from the exhibition, then you realize that the world is actually surreal.
The world is surreal.
And that will explain so many things, right? But this is also, this goes in the Western civilization, the Western, from all back to Plato. The idea of trying to achieve a definition for reality or an understanding of what reality is, that is a question that we carry on from the very beginning, and it's interesting because there were moments in which there's an evolution clearly on understanding, but it still is it's not something that it's like a question that will never be completely answered, and for that sake, perception, which is a subject that I'm interested in, it played a huge role. There were thousands of years in which humans believe that, I don't know, something like the sun or the stars or everything was spinning, around us, because that's the way we perceive it. And it was until quite recently, I don't know, like 400 years ago, this guy Copernicus discovered that actually,
we're the ones spinning.
Exactly, we are the ones spinning around the sun. That's not the way we see it. That's not the way we perceive it. And perception is before school, before the classroom that you will visit in the exhibition, if you haven't visited, because the classroom is another work of. Perception is our inherent tool for understanding. That's why I'm interested in perception, because it's something we share besides the ordinary, because the ordinary may change a little bit here to Japan or Argentina or, I don't know, Congo or UK, whatever. There is a perception on that level, we are exactly, we all pretty much see and touch and hear and smell things in the same way. And to not, to not necessarily trust your perception completely and activates a critical sense upon perception. I think the combination and this tennis game between the mind and the senses is what ultimately, I believe, is what may lead us to knowledge.
I want to ask one more question and take a kind of a more art historical tack, if I could, because as you know, and this may be guiding the question, I have a a strong interest in the kinetic art movement, which particularly flourished in Argentina from the early 50s, really, until into the 70s. And I'm thinking in particular of Julio Leparc, who had a retrospective here not that many years ago. And when he was in Paris, in particular, when he was not signing his own name to his work, he had a collaborative group, and their primary objective was to get maximum public participation in this work, that people, they would put it out on the street, and then passersby would be sort of lured into becoming participants in this sort of street theater, improvised street theater that the sculpture led to. I sometimes wonder when I'm looking back at sort of where your work comes from. I think a lot about Leparc because he was also a utopian. He also believed in this sort of idealized project for humanity. But I think like you, he also, I think, understood that we have a road we have to travel. We need to progress in a certain way, in a certain direction, before we can ever consider ourselves approaching or even going to the direction of this ideal world. You know, as an Argentine artist, do you feel anything that kind of comes out of Leparc's example that informs what you do?
Definitely, I'm a great admirer of Leparc works, but to be completely honest, I grew up in I think that for those who grew up in the 20th century, and especially in Argentina, we were formed in the field of art without, we were not having, or at least I didn't have so much information. I wasn't like analyzing or structuring.
Your predecessors.
Yes, like looking at someone's work and
positioning yourself, yes, relative to
exactly. But what I do think that may be interesting, and I now is a theory that has maybe 2 weeks. So maybe ask me next week.
You might have a complete.
But Julio Leparc and Borges and so many creators that I feel interested and I believe that there is a resonance on their work and mine, without being a direct influence. It came up to me the idea that Argentina is a peripheric country, but at the same time. And I think that this peripheric position is a peripheric position in the Western world, but with a very European influence, a mix of culturally speaking, a mix of things. I have the sense that it may create the proper distance to see things, the distance, the difference between being where things are happening or being somewhere with a perspective upon things where things are happening. And I feel like this is what, when we embrace the audience into the work, is a way of almost like stepping out from taking this distance even from the art world itself, like looking at people looking. And then suddenly you're looking at people looking and people looking at people looking. as it happens in the swimming pool, when you're not only playing a role and interacting with the work, but also you are looking at people that are looking at you. And without you inside of the swimming pool, this would be an empty blue box. And there will be no, the narrative of the work itself will not be completed. And I have the feeling that maybe this is this relationship of distance.
Bravo.
Ask me next week. Next week I may change.
Yeah, he's going to change
Yes,
his mind about
for
it.
sure.
So I think it should be clear now, after almost an hour, why I can't get enough of talking to this guy. But it is. I'm looking at Mickey Mouse's hands, and they're telling me that it's time for questions from the audience. So don't be shy. You're not shy.
Oh, so sorry, please wait for a mic so that everybody
interruption.
can hear. Sorry, just trying to get.
Thank you. Pleasure to meet you both. My name's David, I'm from Miami. I've only seen the elevator and I've seen the pool. And something that really stuck out to me is that there's this surreal idea that, you know, all elevators aren't gonna be on the same plane at the same time. Some are up, some are down. And same thing goes for being in a pool. You know, maybe you're a little higher than me underwater than I am to you. And so that's what I think, to me, speaks the most about your work, is this idea that everything is relative. We can be relative to each other because we're all relative to the work in the same way, right? We're all on the same height. And so I just thought it was very interesting that you spoke about, you know, the way that we're a little higher than you in this room, and that changes our role. But being in the elevator, you know, we're all on the same plane, and this like line of sight comes out, you know, where we can see each other. And same thing goes for being in the pool, because when you're underwater, you don't see each other. So I wanted to know if that's something that you considered, this idea that we're all on the same plane when you were making the works.
First of, what's your name again? David. Thank you for your question. I would say two things. First of all, congratulations on the work that you just created. It's a beautiful one. And this is a very important issue. Very often I am asked if the work, this particular work or this other work, is about this and this. And the truth is that I believe that art, the interesting thing, the only interesting thing, or the most interesting thing for me in relation to art, is that the artist makes something which is a 50%, and the 50% remaining is what the viewer will experience, interpret, feel, and that's the magic of it. So there is no, it's like we've been in school for so long, I mean, trying to get it right. You know, did I get it right? What's this? And I can say yes, but it doesn't really matter whether this was, there are a lot of things that we create that expresses things that we are not even conscious that we are doing. So, but what is interesting is exactly that, what you're saying. What is interesting to me is to get a
response?
A response and an idea from the work. Thank you.
Hi, Leandro. Thank you so much for both of you. Visiting a museum is a really, sometimes, most of the time, a lonely experience. Is the viewer with the work of art. Some works are talking, some works are not talking. And my question to you is, after visiting exhibits that you did, people that don't know each other, the first time look at each other, start sharing emotions, talking about the sentiments of each other in front of their work of art, is something that you have in your back of your creativity mind when you produce the social effect in a very lonely society that, in particular after COVID, and for me is human, for me is art. And I wonder if you have that idea of our social condition when you create a new work.
Yeah, thank you. It's a beautiful remark, definitely. I mean, and definitely I do. Same as what David was mentioning. Definitely these are parts of my cosmos. But I think this is not, this is, you know, it goes, I don't know exactly how to articulate the idea, but basically it goes into who we are, things that, our values, our beliefs, the type of people we are, and then I think that then what we create is a manifestation of things we share without being necessarily so conscious of or believing in the way you present it, which is beautiful. By the way, it's almost like a mission. You find a mission on the work to be able to gather people and put people together, and I think that is beautiful, and that, yeah, it's part of the feedback of what I said before. I think is what we create is a 50%, and without the motivation of those who are interested in coming and sharing, it would never work. Thank you so much.
We have time for just one last question before they have to move on to a press interview.
Hello, my name is Mava, and I am an artist and a professor, and I teach in a deaf university where all the students are deaf, and it's the only university in the world for deaf people. So last year I came and I applied for a presentation about surrealism in movies as an artist perspective, and one of my students spoke about you and your swimming pool. So I decided to come here today to see the installation of the swimming pool, you know, and at first I was not able to come, but now that I come, I see the connection with surrealism and connection with your installations, and how you explained about the thought process and the work that is being given and the answers that you're giving, that oftentimes you challenge to give a specific answer of why did you make this art piece? Why did you do this installation? But I do see how you challenge that, and how you were explaining how you erase the outlines of an object. Can you explain to me what is that term you used for erasing the outlines? Is there a term?
Well, I don't know. I would say when I'm saying erasing the outlines, I'm trying to think on two things. First, on the recognition of an object, that we understand what it is, because we can perceive the whole. Therefore, having the possibility of seeing the whole of this, I can understand this is a bottle of water. But if you're immersed into this water, probably we would not be able to have a full understanding of what this object is. And that applies to the work of art, and that applies to our daily living. We are immersed on a life, on a city, on systems, and we are not able to fully understand our reality because we are immersed on a reality, and we share, and it's a very complex universe within a universe. That's why I thought that the work should potentially play with that, with discovering and understanding. So in my work, you may are inside on something, but you will find by yourself, without no one telling you, you will find and understand what is happening and how is it made. There's no trick. There's no an algorithm that fascinates your senses but block your understanding. Here, everything is on the table.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and please join me in thank you.
You all have been the most incredible audience. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's thank Leandro Erlich for being here.
Thank you so much, Dan.
And thank you to Pam. Please come and join us for a walkthrough of the exhibition for the press. We'll be starting in
Just minutes.
in a minute.
And please, if you like the exhibition, tell your friends and family, and if you don't like it, just don't say anything.